We kept our end of the bargain when we signed the treaties.
Tonight, a Saskatchewan First Nation sues the government for failing to uphold their obligations under treaty.
It's torture. The way in which the federal government has been treating prisoners in its institutions who are in solitary confinement is essentially torture under international standards.
A BC court strikes down solitary confinement as unconstitutional.
You have to tell those stories, because right now we're talking about procreation, and other people should not be telling the stories.
And a Huron-Wendat director brings Where the Blood Mixes to a French audience for the first time. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. A First Nation in southern Saskatchewan has filed a lawsuit against the provincial and federal governments over the loss of use of their traditional territories promised to them during the signing of Treaty 4. APTN's Larissa Burnoff explores what this lawsuit means and how it could potentially set precedents across the country.
Carry the Kettle First Nation Chief Elsie Jack says her people have had enough. Jack says her community's traditional territories in southern Saskatchewan, which were promised to them during the signing of Treaty 4, have been divided up, developed, or destroyed by the provincial and federal governments, leaving her people with little to no lands to hunt, trap fish, or gather foods and medicines.
Currently today, we don't have any fishing rights. Our hunters have to travel halfway across the province to hunt. And so these are infringements on our treaty rights and treaty obligations that we signed.
In a lawsuit filed on December 21st against both levels of government and the Attorney General on behalf of Carry the Kettle First Nation, it states that the promises made to Carry the Kettle in Treaty 4 have been broken and the rights protected therein have been breached.
We kept our end of the bargain when we signed the treaties, but it's the provincial and the federal governments, and especially the federal governments, they eroded on our treaty rights to ensure that the bands have a place to hunt, a place to fish, and to maintain our way of life.
Carry the Kettle's lawyer Estella White says while this case has national precedence, this is the first time legal action has been taken against the province of Saskatchewan by a First Nation for an infringement of treaty rights.
This is the first claim of its kind, and the potential implications of such a case, it's really about holding the government of Saskatchewan to account for the promises that it has made under Treaty 4 and other treaties.
White says this case is very complex and it could take years before a resolution is found.
It can be anywhere between 3 to 5 years until this issue actually makes it to trial.
APTN reached out to Saskatchewan's Ministry of Justice. Through an email, the province acknowledged that they have recently received this statement of claim, and it will take time to review the allegations and prepare a statement of defense. As the matter is now before the courts, it would be inappropriate to comment further. The federal government has yet to make a comment in regards to this lawsuit. Larissa Burnoff, APTN National News, Carry the Kettle First Nation.
A Conservative MLA from Alberta has apologized for comments he made to local media about First Nations. Dave Schneider was discussing changes to election boundaries when he said, quote, "These people don't traditionally vote, and how is the population going to get engaged in this political system in this province?" Schneider tweeted yesterday that he apologized to anyone offended by his choice of words, and it was not his intent to offend. Papachase First Nation Chief Calvin Bruno strongly disagreed with Schneider's comments. He says Indigenous Albertans are very involved in politics.
He's saying that we're disengaged. I disagree with that. There's 45 First Nations, 46 of us, and not only that, we have Aboriginal Métis councillor now, Aaron Paquette, and I know that there was a huge wave of support for him. A lot of Aboriginal people are very proud of him being in there. And to say, that we're not engaged, that's not true. Ill-advised statements. He should know his facts.
And we would like to hear what you have to say about this or any other story. Here's how to contact us. Send an email to news@aptn.ca, like our APTN National News Facebook page, follow us on Twitter @APTN News, or go to our website, aptnnews.ca. Inmates in federal prisons can no longer be put indefinitely in isolation. That's because today the British Columbia Supreme Court ruled in favor of the BC Civil Liberties Association and John Howard Society of Canada. They challenged the federal government's use of solitary confinement. We're joined now in Vancouver by Josh Peterson, the Executive Director of the BC Civil Liberties Association. Mr. Peterson, thanks for taking the time to join us. Why do you think the BC Supreme Court ruled in your favor and agreed that the Canadian government cannot put prisoners in isolation for indefinite periods of time?
Because it's torture. The way in which the federal government has been treating prisoners in its institutions who are in solitary confinement is essentially torture under international standards. This court today, this decision is actually the most significant prison law decision from any Canadian trial court in history. We've talked to legal experts today who verified that. And it's really significant because not only did he find that putting people in solitary confinement for unlimited periods of time is a violation of their right to security of the person, that it harms them psychologically, that it harms their health, that in some cases it increases their risk for suicide. But he also found, very significantly, that the regime discriminates against Indigenous prisoners, men and women alike, because a disproportionately high number of Indigenous people within the prison system are placed into solitary confinement. It is they, more than others, or disproportionately to others, who bear the brunt of this terrible treatment, which can include years on end in a small cell, sometimes covered in the walls covered in feces and food in terrible conditions for up to 23 hours a day. So it's a very, very significant decision, and we hope that the federal government will fix this system rather than appealing it.
As you mentioned there, the judge did rule that isolation is especially harmful to Indigenous and mentally ill inmates. Can you explain why?
Well, in addition to the fact that they are more likely to be placed in solitary confinement, and that once they're in solitary confinement, they spend longer there than prisoners of other races, it is fundamentally harmful to spirituality. People will not be able to have proper access to elders and to other ways in which to express their spirituality and their culture. They're deprived of many other opportunities, including opportunities for skills training, for example, and that kind of thing, so that when you finally come out of prison, you're more harmed, you're sicker, and you've had less opportunity to develop yourself while in jail. We had evidence from numerous Indigenous prisoners, but also from Indigenous elders who provide counseling to prisoners who are in the system, who testified as to the excruciating experiences that folks have had. One that many viewers may remember is Bobby Lee Worm, a Cree woman who is from Saskatchewan, who spent over 700 days in solitary confinement and has been working with us for about 6 years to put an end to this terrible system. Today, this is a victory for her. It's a victory for all of the other Indigenous prisoners who worked in this case, who brought courage forward to put their stories in front of this judge, to get that judge to be there with them in those cells, to understand what their experiences were like. And we think that that is partly why he was able to make as strong a decision today as he did.
Mr. Peterson, we're running low on time, but what does this mean for people in isolation this very minute?
Well, the effect of the judgment was suspended for a year. But after 1 year, the federal government's law that allows them to do this won't be law anymore. We hope that the federal government, the Trudeau government, has promised, Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould has promised that they're going to bring a fix to this system. They promised it even in the election. So if they mean what they say, they shouldn't appeal this judgment. They should take this judgment as a guide for what they need to do to truly fix the system. They had introduced a bill in June of last year which was completely inadequate to solve these problems. They need to come to the table with prisoners groups, with groups like us, with others, to talk about how this problem can be solved once and for all. And I think it's important for people to remember to hear what the court said today. The court was explicit. They do not need to do this to keep prisons safe. Some people say, oh, well, what are we going to do if we can't isolate prisoners? There was evidence of all kinds of other alternatives that the government could use to fix the problem, other than putting people in these torturous and terrible conditions. And so it's now on the federal government to be true to their word and to fix this problem, not only for Indigenous Canadians, but for every Canadian.
The ruling states prisoners can't be held in isolation indefinitely, but does that mean prisoners will still be subject to isolation, and if so, for how long?
Well, what the court said is that there has to be strict and hard time limits. The international standard is 15 days, so the court pointed to that as a possibility, although it recognized that there was evidence in this case that even at times, durations less than 15 days, there can be significant harm already happening to prisoners. But the international standard adopted, called the Mandela Rules, adopted worldwide by the UN, that Canada participated in developing, say that 15 days ought to be the maximum, that there needs to be external judicial review of people's placement in solitary confinement, that there need to be alternatives. So there may still be some use of solitary confinement, but in 2017 there were over 8,000 uses of it. Wow. That should be much, much, much diminished, and we should be working as hard as we can to make sure that nobody needs to be placed in solitary confinement in order to deal with problems in the prison. The judge was clear.
Sorry, Mr. Peterson, we're going to have to hold you there.
Not enough staff, not enough services is not enough. Yeah.
But we appreciate your time. Like you say, a very significant ruling here today. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us about it.
Thanks for having me on.
Time for a quick break, and then we'll bring you the story of an award-winning game that is receiving criticism from oil companies in the United States. Here's a look at Thursday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. 5 above in St. John's, 0 in Halifax. A snowy -15 in Happy Valley Goose Bay, -8 in Cartwright. Sunny and 9 below for Sept-Îles, -5 in Montreal, -4 in Toronto, Peterborough, Ottawa, and North Bay, -5 on Thursday in Thunder Bay and in Sioux Lookout. Over to northern Manitoba, -18 and snow in Churchill, snow and -13 in Thompson, -4 in Winnipeg and Gimli Harbor where snow is expected. A mild day across parts of Saskatchewan, 9 above in Regina, +8 in Swift Current, +3 for Meadow Lake, -1 and snow in Buffalo Narrows. Welcome back. The award-winning play Where the Blood Mixes will be presented in French for the first time. It debuted in Montreal this week. APTN's Robbie Purdon has more.
After 22 years on stage, Huron-Wendat actor Charles Bender decided to try out the director's chair. He chose Where the Blood Mixes, a play he previously starred in because he wants to bring the story to a new audience.
That play stayed with me for a good 8 years, and the necessity to bring that story to in French to people in Quebec and not get them left out from such a beautiful play was important to me.
The story, written by Kevin Loring, is about Floyd, a residential school survivor who was content with drowning his sorrows at the local tavern, until his daughter, who was adopted 20 years earlier, wanted to reconnect with him.
Cet événement-là va faire en sorte que tout ce qui s'est passé auparavant va ressurgir, autant pour son personnage que tous ceux qui gravitent autour de lui.
Marco Collin, who plays Floyd, says this play is close to his heart because of what he experienced in his own Innu community of Mastoyatch.
Pour ma part, je connais des gens qui y sont allés. Ceux de ma communauté, on les envoyait à Fort-Georges, dans le coin de la baie James, pour qu'ils soient carrément très loin de leur communauté. Heureusement, nous, on n'y est pas été. Peut-être qu'on a subi les contre-coups de ça.
This is also the second play produced by Charles and Marco's production company, Menuan Teguan. For them, it's important that Indigenous people tell Indigenous stories.
First of all, it's our stories. And then the second is you have to tell those stories, because right now we're talking about appropriation, and other people should not be telling the stories without consulting or without doing the appropriate protocols and so on and so forth. And we have to be at the forefront of creating those protocols. We have to be at the forefront of telling the stories to make sure that we're not just saying no to other people, we're actually saying yes to ourselves.
Là où le sang se mêle, or Where the Blood Mixes, will be presented at the Denise Pelletier Theatre until February 3rd. Robbie Purdon, APTN National News, Montreal.
An award-winning Indigenous game created to raise awareness about taking care of Turtle Island has been the subject of criticism by oil groups in the States. Our reporter Charlotte Mort-Jacobs met up with some of the game's creators this week in Yellowknife.
Thunderbird Strike.
In the imaginative, award-winning video game Thunderbird Strike, you will hear Dene slang and see Indigenous wood-style art. But what is being celebrated by Indigenous activists is also being criticized in the States as eco-terrorism. Thunderbird Strike, created by native designer and Michigan State University professor Elizabeth LaPonce, is a high-score 2D game that transforms players into a Thunderbird who flies from Alberta's oil sands to the Great Lakes. Gamers can bring fallen caribou and buffalo to life and strike down oil machinery, pipelines, and buildings with the lightning they collect. The game was meant to illustrate human greed, but gained traction by oil companies who peg the content as putting lives at risk.
Because I don't want anyone to feel like it's about harm, right? That was the important piece to me, is that you can play the game the whole way through and you don't ever have to actually strike lightning at anything. You can just appreciate the art and the stories.
LaPonce says oil lobbyists called for a retraction of the game and the funding that went with it from local arts councils.
They sparked a Minnesota senator to basically lead this media smear campaign against me, which went on Fox News and all over, referring to the game as encouraging eco-terrorism, which is like a federal offense. I mean, you could go to jail.
Thunderbirds are seen as sacred beings possible of renewal or destruction. LaPonce drew part of the game during the Fort Mac fires near the tar sands.
Hola! And that's when you acquire your points at the end of every level.
She connected with the Northwest Territories artist Casey Coyson, who created the sound effects and voiceovers. He held a launch in Yellowknife this week.
It inspires people just to be a little bit more knowledgeable about what's really happening and the efforts that are being made to, you know, make our future sustainable, as well as the efforts that are being made to hinder that. So I really hope that people are just inspired after they play this game.
Thunderbird Strike is available for free on all Windows, PC, and mobile devices. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
The National Inquiry, legalization of marijuana, and a senator under fire. Those were some of the issues we put in focus today during a new episode of the show. We've got highlights for you coming up after this quick break. Here's the rest of Thursday's weather outlook, picking back up in northern Alberta. 3 above in Peace River, +2 in Grand Prairie, +11 for Medicine Hat, 8 above in Calgary and Lethbridge. More rain in store for the wet coast, +8 in Vancouver, Campbell River and Port Hardy. 8 and rain as well in Prince Rupert. Showers and 7 above in Sandspit. In Yukon, -17 in Beaver Creek, -12 in Watson Lake. Over to NWT, -12 as well in Fort Simpson and Wrigley, 10 below in Ray Lakes. -11 in Sax Harbor, -6 in Paulatuck and Tuktoyaktuk. A downright chilly day in parts of Nunavut. Sunny and 30 below in Repulse Bay and Cambridge Bay. Sunny and -29 in Joe Haven, -27 under the sun in Resolute. Welcome back. In Focus is back for the new year, and we started off with a look back at some of the big stories of 2017 and a look ahead to what to expect in 2018. Our guests were Negon Sinclair, Pam Palmater, and Tim Fontaine. Here's some of the highlights from today's show, starting with our conversation about Senator Lynn Bayak. Is this a free speech issue?
No, it's not. It's just blatant racism. This is someone who is blatantly and undeniably and proudly racist and is doing everything she can to harm Indigenous peoples through her racism or indirectly through allowing other people to post racist comments. And that's completely unacceptable. There's no room in free speech for hate speech. And I equate the things that she says and does, and it's not uncommon in the Conservative Party with regards to First Nations, always implying that we're somehow deficient or that genocide didn't happen. I mean, it's essentially denying genocide when we have an entire commission that produced a very substantial report that proved that genocide did happen. Physical, biological, and cultural genocide. All three happened.
The AFN's not a government, it's a lobby group, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, there's nothing to be shameful about that. I think what you're saying is very important. It needs to own up to what it is and stop pretending like it's something else. But, you know, like, it doesn't have to be this way. That's the thing that I say is the AFN, that we've had many people who have come along. And I know, Pam, you did run on a platform to do things like this, but I know other people who have also run on a platform to make the AFN truly connected with grassroots people, with communities. I mean, you could take the control. I mean, I know that bureaucracies, and the AFN is a bureaucracy, the job of a bureaucracy is to continue the bureaucracy. But if you, I mean, the AFN could, through many very significant and yet almost comparatively small changes, turn into an organization that actually represents people, that actually engages people. You could take this organization, which has millions and millions of project money, and be able to create a self-sustaining organization as well. Many innovative ideas have come in, and it's possible. So I'd like to give a glass half full vision to say that somebody will come along. Oh, this one's empty. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yours is still half full.
Mine's half full, but we should actually switch because
I think I would like someone to come along and for the Chiefs to get behind that person, but unfortunately it hasn't happened yet.
And you can watch that full episode of In Focus now by visiting our website, aptnnews.ca. Now to our photo of the day. This one was shared by Cameron Barfoot. It looks like strokes of paint in the night sky. An awesome shot of the Northern Lights over Yellowknife. Thanks again to Cameron for sharing this photo with us. And if you'd like to see your photo featured on APTN National News, email share@aptn.ca or tag APTN News on Twitter or Instagram. You can also follow us on Instagram to see past photos of the day and pictures from our reporters. That is your APTN National News for this Wednesday. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night.